Welcome to the nextTalk podcast. We are a nonprofit passionate about keeping kids safe online. We're learning together how to navigate tech, culture, and faith with our kids. Today we are joined by Ashton Martinez, and I want to have Ashton introduce herself and tell you the organization that she works for. They are really helping a lot of kids. Ashton, can you tell our listeners about your organization and who you are?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ashton Martinez, and I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Paluxy River Children's Advocacy Center. So, if you are not familiar with what a child advocacy center is, the kind of way that I like to explain it is we are a child friendly, kind of community based facility that offers advocacy for children and families who abuse has been a part of their story, right? So we typically deal with sexual abuse and physical abuse in our center. And I can go into a little bit more detail about kind of the three parts of an advocacy center, but we kind of bring this multidisciplinary approach to child abuse. So advocacy centers were created out of a need for children who had been abused to basically only have to tell their story one time. And so that's why advocacy centers kind of were created to bring together all of the entities, if you will, law enforcement, CPS, advocacy here, counseling, medical personnel if needed. Altogether, the child would have to tell their story one time to a forensic interviewer at our center, and then that way it would kind of help with the integrity of the case throughout. And then we also have counseling for that child. Any child that comes through a child advocacy center gets counseling, right, for the duration of that need. And then we provide family advocacy for the non-offending caregiver. So we walk through with that caregiver or family member, whoever it may be, the duration of that case. And then what I do most of is prevention and education within schools and the communities that we serve. That's kind of in a nutshell.
That's amazing. And child advocacy centers, they're typically the acronym is CAC, right? That's what you guys refer
Yep.
to them as?
CACs, you'll sometimes hear people call them CACs too. Like I've heard that too, but yeah, CACs is usually what, and they all have different names. Like ours is Paluxy River Children's Advocacy Center. There are other advocacy centers that don't have child advocacy center in the name, but that's what they are. So sometimes you don't even realize maybe that's what's in your community until you dig a little deeper.
That there is CAC. And I
Mm-hmm.
got to meet Ashton because she had me into the community as a prevention, right? This is part of
Yes.
your prevention piece.
Yeah. Part of what we do is try to bring people from the outside in who are experts in their field. And so I was a listener of Next Talk and actually did watched a Zoom or something that you had done with another CAC, I think, and then listened to Next Talk for a while and then thought, "Oh, I need to reach out." So reached out and you guys came to our neck of the woods, if you will, and you came and did a presentation. It was amazing. We got so much good feedback. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and we educated on the online dangers and what to look for and how important obviously the communication piece is at home. I mean, that's really part of the prevention piece, so kids can notice and be alarmed of the warning signs, and then also
Absolutely.
when something happens, immediately they know, uh-oh, a line's been
Uh-oh.
crossed here. I need to tell somebody.
And I just want to say something you guys do so well at Next Talk is just make it so relatable for the parent and the caregiver. As someone who's been in prevention education and I've listened to a lot of speakers and a lot of trainings and a lot of there's something to be said about making it relatable and a little more understandable that because that's what drew me to you guys as a parent. I was like, okay, this is one of the first times I've heard someone speak, and I feel encouraged, as a parent.
Thank you for saying that. That's so sweet. We're so glad it's helpful. We always want to be real and relevant and practical for sure. When I was talking to you and I came into your community after the event, you were talking to me about ways you're getting involved in your public school in Texas as a parent, not anything that you on a professional side. And
Right.
I thought it was so interesting. And I thought, I don't think a lot of parents know that they can get involved in their public schools this way. Now, I do want to caution listeners, this is for Texas only, Texas public schools. And then at the end, we're going to talk about maybe if you're outside of Texas, some questions that you could ask if you want to get involved. But Ashton, if you could take our audience along on that conversation after that event and we were talking and telling our audience how you got involved in your kids' school.
Kind of the way it all started was I was also a parent who was unaware. I didn't know that I had access to kind of have conversations with the ISD that my own kids were in. And I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old boy, so they're in kindergarten and 3rd grade. And it wasn't until I came and started working at the Advocacy Center that I was introduced to hey, some new kind of terminology, a SHAC committee, for example. And what's a SHAC committee, right? And so that stands for a School Health Advisory Council, but you'll often hear them referred to as SHAC committees. Sometimes Student Health Advisory Council, sometimes but School Health Advisory Council, right? And so what is that? Well, as someone that's a part of the education team at the Advocacy Center, I would sit in on those and I learned a lot more that, parents are on these SHAC committees. So that's when I started my own personal kind of journey on what a SHAC committee is, not only professionally, but what that meant personally as well. And so I think something that parents in the state of Texas, right, it is a part of the Texas Education Code that every school district have a SHAC committee. Okay, it's in the law. So, and those committees have to be made up. Those are also, you can look this up on texas.gov if you wanted to, but in those SHAC committees, they have to consist of parents. The majority of that committee has to be parents. Now, there can be some school administrators or teachers, something like that on there, community members, but most of that committee has to be parents. And what that committee does is it votes on, if you will, and makes decisions about a lot of things health related in our schools. But as it relates to what we're doing at the CAC and what I was really interested in as a parent was the education around child abuse, preventing, reporting, all of that kind of stuff. The curriculum, what's being taught to my children? Is there anything being taught to my children? If so, what is that curriculum? That kind of stuff. And the SHAC committee is who decides that. So if you are a parent that is kind of curious, you don't really know what is being taught in your schools, you don't really know if anything at all, and you want to start that conversation, a great place to look would be if your ISD has a SHAC committee, who that person is at the ISD that runs it, then send them an email and just say, hey, I heard about this committee. I'm interested in knowing more about it. What can you tell me?
So you started serving on this SHAC committee in your school district. Now, this is not an electable position, not like school board where you have to get elected,
No.
Correct?
Nope, absolutely not. There are no, as far as qualifications, any parent can be interested in being on the SHAC committee. Now, I know from my own personal, for the ISD that my kids are in, right? They try to make sure that there's a representative from each elementary school. And so I will say I went in the year prior and expressed my interest in wanting to be on the SHAC committee, and that elementary school that my kids went to already had that position filled, but they were rolling off the next year. So basically they said, next year, you're the next one in line. So that you could run into that potentially, but if so, you can still another thing that SHAC committees are required to do, it's in their law, the bylaws for SHAC committees, is post their minutes. So even if you're not on the committee itself, you want to know what they're talking about, you want to know what they're discussing, those kinds of things, the minutes have to be posted as well.
And who's on the committee? I mean, a lot of people just don't even know this committee exists. And
right, and that it's even a requirement. It's not even that some schools have them because it's helpful. It's actually in the Texas Education Code.
Well, and I think too, just I think this is your story and how you stumbled upon, I think is such a testament to how we assume we know what's going on, but we don't.
Yeah.
And even you, in working in a CAC, didn't
Hmm.
know that
I
this
did not.
was a possibility for you to serve your school in this way. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this show, is just to say, hey, you want to get more involved with your kid's school? What's going
You're
on
fine.
the SHAC committee?
Yeah.
And figuring out what they're doing, because that would also include like sexual curriculum, all of that
Yes.
stuff
All of
is
it.
going to be
All of that.
included.
Sex ed, all of that. Smaller school districts, I want to give them like a shout out because sometimes they're just a little bit behind the curve, right? On getting things implemented. And so if you find that your ISD maybe doesn't have a SHAC committee, or maybe they're a bigger school district and they don't assume that that's intentional. They may just need someone to express some interest. They may have had a change in staff or administration, and maybe they don't even realize, like, oh, this is kind of an area where we need to improve. Because something that kind of helps prove the need, if you will, of a SHAC committee is Jenna's law, which again, some parents don't know that there's a law that was implemented in 2009 in the state of Texas, basically that requires public schools to provide this prevention education of child abuse, how to recognize and report that to staff and to children, okay, that are in public schools. And then in 2017, I believe, is when it was amended to include sex trafficking from the age of seventh grade and older. So there is a law in Texas that states that schools have to be providing this education, which SHAC committees within ISDs help make the decisions on that curriculum. And as a parent, that's how you can be on the front lines, kind of helping make those decisions. And like for me, when I did get on my boys' SHAC committee for our ISD, they were already in the midst of reviewing some curriculum. And so I was encouraged because I'm like, they're already kind of doing some of the things. And so they approved a curriculum and that'll actually roll out this year for the first time, which I'm excited about. But yeah, so if that helps a little bit of background too, knowing about that law.
I think that's great, and you can see on those timestamps of those laws how we're evolving and trying to educate
Yes,
as technology becomes part of the
absolutely.
situation. Because with sex trafficking, I mean, I immediately go to more of the technology side of that, even
For
the
sure.
online grooming and stuff that's happening. So that's great. I also think it's wonderful that you said, just because a school may not have a SHAC committee or may not have updated curriculum yet, it's not
Yep,
that they don't want to do it. And I think that's so important, not to ever assume the worst of your kid's school.
for sure.
I think we live in a hostile environment where critical eyes and everything, and everybody's like, you stand up for your kids and you be combative. But I think we need to be really careful with that, because we've got so many overworked teachers and school administrators, and they are doing the best they can. And so many times this is on a to-do list, but then an emergency happens and it keeps getting pushed back. So I do think we need to give some grace here. If you run into your school district and you don't have they don't have a SHAC committee, or they're kind of behind in getting this up and running.
It's one of those things, if you come in kind of accusatory, well,
Yeah.
I know this, you're supposed to have this, and may not turn out the way you would hope. Whereas if you come in as a, hey, this is something I learned, something I would love to be a part of, probably the outcome would be more positive. And I would just encourage anyone, if you discover that, to kind of approach it that way.
Absolutely. And joining it too. I mean,
Hmm.
you have people who've served on there and have rolled out curriculum that may or may need to be updated, and just give grace, because I think most of us are just doing the best we can do here, and
Absolutely.
getting the right curriculum out to the kids. I do want to shout out too. My kids are in the public school, and I've got one in college, but my son is still in a public school. I've never been involved in a SHAC committee. I have interviewed someone else who was an RN who was on a SHAC committee and helped determine this. But I will say one of the things that I have appreciated at my kids' school that I have loved so much as a parent is I get a notice every time we're getting ready to start sex ed that I can come to this meeting, and I go, and they have every day's material laid out on a table where I can see exactly what is being taught every day. And they respect that I want to see what's being taught, and then I can carry on the conversation at home and add my faith to it, or, however I want to adjust to put it through the spiritual lens that we would in our home.
And to your point, so getting the notice, Senate Bill 9 is another piece of legislature. So Senate Bill 9 came through in 2023, actually. So we used to be an opt-out state. Now we are opt-in, meaning you will get that notice. And schools are required. They can send those notices no less than 14 days prior to the curriculum that's going to be taught, with a detail of what they're going to go over. And then you have to opt in for your child to attend that curriculum, and that has to be received by the school, right? As opposed to, the letter goes home and it gets lost and it never comes back. It used to be an opt-out, and so if you didn't get that, you assumed that it was okay that they went, and now it's very much black and white, more of an opt-in. But to your point, part of that opt-in is creating opportunities for you to see the curriculum before it's given to them, right? So we do parent information meetings so we can go over our curriculum. So however your school decides to deliver that, I would encourage anyone with questions, because sometimes it is scary if you hear sex ed or prevention education. I had a mom email me the other day, and she has a 3rd grader, and she said, I'm just curious, what is the verbiage that we use for sexual abuse? That's a valid concern of a 3rd grader. I have a 3rd grader, I was so glad she reached out, but that's what those education kind of informative meetings are for. If you have any questions, go to those so they can answer them and you can see the curriculum.
So that opt-in, that changed in 2023. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a new thing, because
that was the latest update, to it was in 2023. Yes.
Okay, yeah, because I was an opt-out, I'm pretty sure, but it switched now to an opt-in.
Yes. Now it's an opt-in. You have to have explicit consent that they are allowed to go. It was opt-out before that.
Yeah. The other thing that I will say too is this. I went almost every year except the last year because I knew what was happening. But I went almost every year to those meetings, and I was shocked at how many parents did not go. I just want to say to our listeners, it's really important that when you get information on health, wellness, prevention education, anything like that, you want to be involved in those conversations, because they're always going to tie into the online stuff that we're talking about at nextTalk, the grooming, the manipulation, all of that stuff is going to be included in that. And it's a great tie-in when you've been saying this stuff at home and then the school now says it, and then you can circle back and tie it all together. And it really is like a village speaking into your kid to make sure they're safe.
Yes, absolutely. And I say that even to my friends, say that you are a listener who does attend these meetings, and maybe you do have a little bit more information. I encourage my friends to attend these things. I'm when you get that, go.
Yes.
Listen. And sometimes I just think people think, oh, this is really, and truly once they're there, they're oh, this is important information. I'm really glad I attended. It's one of those, sometimes you just have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and do something that feels a little bit out of the ordinary for you. And in the end, it really is beneficial.
I remember in 6th grade when my little 6th grader was being told the definition of anal and oral sex. I was like, whoa, what? And then I went and she was like, listen, we're just telling them that it is sex and STDs. And it was no more of that. There wasn't anything graphic there. That was left up to conversations at home if we were going to have those conversations, which we did.
Which speaks to the importance of those conversations, because if you're not having them at home, they're going to ask friends, they're going to ask friends of friends, they're going to ask the internet, and we all know what happens when that happens.
Well, and I remember as a parent of a young middle schooler for the first time, I just remember thinking it's too soon, too fast. Like we don't need to cover this. But the way it was presented in our sex ed class was we don't want them thinking that they can't, there's not consequences of that. Like there's STDs involved with that. They need to make sure that that is sex. And we're not going to get into the graphics of it and answer detailed questions about it, but they do need to know it is intercourse. And that was eye-opening to me of, okay, nobody's pushing an agenda on my kid here. It's literally like the definition and the fact of that it is sex and there are consequences from it. And so I remember that. I almost got a defensive, what are you trying to push on my kid? This sexualized stuff so fast. That's not always the case. And so we just need to pause and really look at the curriculum and what are they trying to do in this curriculum and what does it look like?
And the way that you do that is by attending those meetings, getting on your SHAC committee and things like that. That's how you get involved. You can be an active participant.
And at least be in the know, even if the SHAC committee is full and you can't serve. You're in the know. You know who's on it, and you're watching the minutes and that sort of thing.
Yes, you can ask the questions. You know, if you see something in those minutes and you have a question, email the secretary. Email the one. I mean, the names are listed there, and your district should provide whoever it is that's in charge, if you will, of the committee who's kind of spearheading it. But you can just shoot an email. Hey, I have a question about this,
Absolutely.
And they'll answer that.
So we're talking about Texas public schools right now.
Yes.
We have a lot of listeners across the U.S. and say they're out there and like, man, I want to get involved. How does my sex ed curriculum get passed, and who makes those decisions? What kinds of questions or who do you think they should contact for that information?
Great question. So the first thing that I would do, depending on the state that I'm in, would be to, sometimes Google is our friend, to ask Google what laws are in place in my state that requires public education, to educate my kids on. If it's sex ed you're curious about, if it's prevention education, because I mentioned Jenna's law here in the state of Texas, but 35 other states in the United States have Aaron's law, which is a very similar law. Okay, so there's a good chance, right, that your state falls under Aaron's law, which says, hey, we require all public schools to give this curriculum, right? And so that would kind of give you, again, a foothold to start that conversation with your ISD. I know New York has a Senate bill. Oregon has a Senate bill that requires those things. So if it's not Jenna's law, if it's not Aaron's law, it could be a Senate bill. So start just trying to figure out if there is a law in place. I would say the majority of states in the United States have a law in place. Once you figure out what that is, go to your ISD and just say, hey, I'm curious what we're doing to fulfill this, to fulfill Aaron's law, to fulfill Senate bill, whatever. What curriculum are we teaching our kids? I don't know that they have to have a SHAC committee, right? I know Texas Education Code, we have SHAC committees are required. They may call it something else. You can look into your .gov kind of and see what your education code says. But I think you can start the conversation simply by saying, I know Aaron's law, or I know this Senate bill says that this is supposed to be provided to all public school students. What are we doing to meet that law in this ISD, if you're not aware? And that should start the conversation. And you could even say, I've heard of student or school health advisory councils. Do we have anything like that here? Kind of starting those conversations, I think is just the easiest way to do it. And they'll get you to the right person. There's going to be someone that's over health curriculum for an ISD, right? Just like there's somebody who's over English curriculum and math curriculum and things like that. And then you just kind of go from there and decide is this something they're already doing? Your state may not be an opt-in state, right? So you may not even realize that they're already doing that, and they just aren't required to send the permission slip home, right?
Well, and that's a
Um,
question that you need to know as a
so
parent. If
that's kind of what that, if you don't know, I would ask. Because it could be that they're already doing it and they don't have to send the permission slip home to do that. So it's worth asking kind of on all fronts for all that information. What is the curriculum? If they aren't doing it, what can we do to get that in place? If they are doing it, have you been notified? Did you even know, that was happening? So,
I think that's great because, and again, I want to reiterate, this is not an accusatory. This is not
nope.
assuming the school is doing anything wrong. That's not what we're saying. We just want you to know what your kid is being taught so you can have the conversations at home, fill in the gaps or whatever else.
Right.
And that you just need to know that. You need to know what is being taught to your children and being involved in their education. One other question for you, Ashton. How have
Yes.
you liked serving on this committee, on the SHAC committee?
So I've enjoyed it for a couple of reasons. One, it makes me feel like an active participant, right? In just like what my kids are being educated about when it comes to those important kind of hot topics sometimes. But also, I didn't realize, I mean, we kind of like get to hear from the head of like nutrition, because that falls under the health umbrella. So we get updates like from the head of nutrition for our ISD, and we talk about things that I didn't even realize. The school nurse does an update, and all of our schools got EpiPens like in the nurse's office, and that was a big deal because we didn't have that. And so it really keeps me in the know about so many things, and just meeting kind of community members and other parents who are kind of just concerned with the same things and want to do good. That's what I've loved so much about serving on the SHAC committee in my personal role. I'm on several SHAC committees professionally, which is great too. It looks a little bit different, but I have enjoyed like the collaborative round table kind of feel that SHAC committees have. They're not super formal. They really are collaborative. Just a place for everybody to come together and make decisions on what's best for kids.
I love that. I love that so
Yeah.
much. We need more
Me too.
parents being involved in the public
Mm-hmm.
schools. I mean, they do so much for our kids. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so much. And I think the more we can get involved and help and be part of the process, I mean, it truly takes all of us.
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, thank you so much for doing this show. I think it was super helpful. If we get any questions, I may be sending them your way if that's okay.
Absolutely. Always send them my way. I'm so thankful to have been here, and hope that this information gives somebody out there just a little bit of, you know what, I'm going to take this information and be proactive with it, because we know knowledge is power. Sometimes we want to do better, we just don't know how. So maybe you being a part of your local SHAC committee or asking questions for your ISD near you can kind of help you do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ashton. Full of great
Thank
information.
you. Bye.
nextTalk is a 501c3 nonprofit keeping kids safe online. To support our work, make a donation at nexttalk.org. nextTalk resources are not intended to replace the advice of a trained healthcare or legal professional, or to diagnose, treat, or otherwise render expert advice regarding any type of medical, psychological, legal, financial, or other problem. You are advised to consult a qualified expert for your personal treatment plan.
Our Next Talk podcast is in the top 2% of over 3.4 million podcasts ranked by Listen Notes. But now we're also adding YouTube. So this is a whole new thing we're doing. If you could like, subscribe, and comment on these videos, it would help us so much. We appreciate y'all.